Manitoba Association of Watersheds is the proud lead partner of the Living Lab Prairies project, funded by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Our first presentation this morning will be an introduction and an overview of the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project by Mr. John Fitzmaurice. Mr. Fitzmaurice has worked in agriculture and agri-food Canada for over 20 years as a soil specialist, where his work has focused on agricultural land and soil management. Recently, John's role has included being AAFC's site coordinator for the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project. Please welcome Mr. John Fitzmaurice.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to give you a super quick overview of Living Labs. Probably many of you have seen it already, but we don't have a lot of time. So I'm just going to quickly go through it. So first thing is, what is a living lab? Now, a living lab is an integrated approach to agricultural innovation. So we work with farmers, producers, stakeholders, partners to develop new solutions for farmers, and we do it at the field scale. So it's a different approach than our usual. Instead of us doing plot research, we're actually going out to the field and working with the farmers on the field in their world. So how do we go about this? The first thing is we have to integrate the three core principles of Living Labs. The first one is that participants can co-develop the practices or technologies. So it means that instead of us just saying, hey, we want to study this, we go back and we say, hey, what are you interested in? How can we help you? The next step is that we have to carefully design, test, and improve these practices. We go through a process of experiments and trials, that sort of thing, just to see how we can make things better. And finally, we have to ensure they meet the needs of the user. Once again, going back to the user. Instead of us just saying, hey, here's our results, it's like saying, okay, here's our results, but can you use it? In the end, we hope that this means that we will have practices that are adopted, and they'll be adopted more quickly than through our normal processes. There you go. So this is a Living Labs innovation cycle. It's kind of simple. It's really, you start off with the co-development, you have your meetings, you discuss what you want to build, you generate ideas. You move that forward into the testing phase. That's where we go out to the farms, we set up field scale projects, we go and we design the trials, we do demonstrations, we take it out and we test it and we see the results in that environment. Then we evaluate the results. We look at them, we say, hey, are they good? Does trial A better than trial B? Or we say, okay, we found this out, but can you as a farmer or a producer or a landowner actually utilize this in your system? But as you'll see from this image, this one's kind of closed off, right? It seems like we're going in circles and going nowhere. But this is just to demonstrate the cycle. The actual process is, it's an iterative process. So we start off with the planning, and you have this small little cycle. You kind of build and grow, and you outputs go into the next one, which then grow and build and go into the next one, which then finally go in the adoption. So there's a process there we follow. It's a process of constant learning and constant innovation. So under the broad themes, how did we develop this? So like I said, I'm skimming through this really quick because this usually is a presentation that takes about 40 minutes. So when we first started to develop Living Labs, we needed to have a broad understanding of the issues. So there was a regional meeting held here in Manitoba. And that meeting asked those who were involved, stakeholders, producers, partners, what are the issues? We came up with 4 very broad-based issues: water, soil health, biodiversity, and climate. So those were the 4 issues we were broadly brought forward to us. And then these issues were then later on brought out to the producers and the landowners in the local areas that we're working in and got their feedback on what they were interested in within those groups. So this is the 4 watersheds we ended up working with. These watersheds are smaller watersheds, not like an organizational watershed. These are smaller, but they are based or were chosen based upon 2 main facts: the diversity of agricultural practices they represent, and also the diversity of landscapes and soils and water that they represent. And you can see from these images here that there's a great diversity in these watersheds. This is, in this case here, is a land cover map. The 4 watersheds we're working with, first of all, is Upper Oak, just south of Riding Mountain National Park. We have the North Shannon, which is just north of Morton, Manitoba. And we have the main drain, which is in the southeast, centered on the village of Ridgeville, but near Dominion City. And then finally, Swan Lake, which is kind of toward the northwest of Morton, I guess southeast of Brandon. And that's what some of our projects will be talking about today. So like I said, we went out to these communities once we had our broad objectives, and we said, what do you want? What do you want from us? And they came back to us with a whole list of suggestions and options. We presented those options to researchers and our partners, and we came up with ideas to how to work on them, and then we started implementing them. So, and as we go through, we've been going back to these groups as part of that iterative cycle and saying, how are we doing? Does this make sense to you? Obviously with COVID, we haven't really been able to do the in-person meetings that we've been wanting to do, but we have substituted other types of meetings. We've done a lot one-on-one meetings with individual producers, whether it be one producer sitting there through a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting, and having a discussion with our partners and several researchers at the same time, which is in many cases the rare opportunity for a producer to be able to sit down and speak with the researchers themselves. So I have a slide here on questions, but I've been told, ignore that. So next we move on to the next one, but I'd just like to say that the next projects are kind of what was derived out of all those sessions meeting with people and getting their answers to our questions. So maybe what's the next one?
Our next speaker this morning will be Mr. Eric Cameron from Swan Lake First Nation. Swan Lake First Nation is an active producer within the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project, with multiple constructive projects and research activities being undertaken. This morning we will play a pre-recorded interview that Mr. Cameron did for the Living Lab's national workshop that was held earlier this year. And it covers an introduction to Swan Lake First Nation and their involvement with the Living Labs project.
Hi, my name is Eric Cameron. I'm the land manager for Swan Lake First Nation. Swan Lake First Nation is a signatory to Treaty 1 of 1871. Our population is approximately 1,700, and there's about 700 living on reserve and about 1,000 living off. In our area, there's approximately 17,000 acres and 4 parcels of land. The main reserve is in south central Manitoba, in Swan Lake. 7A is Carberry, where Sand Hills Casino sits. And then we have Indian Gardens north of Rathwell. That's a section of land. And we also have a set of land in Headingley, 45 acres in Headingley, south side of Winnipeg. We lease out approximately 70% of our lands to agriculture for cereal crops, and we've also got approximately 150 acres of fee simple lands, which are not under our land code. We signed our land code, which gets us control and manage our own lands under the First Nation Land Management Act. We signed that in 2010. So we more or less control and manage our own lands, like the leases, permits, and etc. But we hand deliver postings and newsletters to each household whenever we need to. When I was a counselor in 2000 to 2022, I came involved with the Trail Lakes Development Group, and then which was the Pembina Valley Conservation District. We are situated in the Pembina Valley District, and since they changed the watersheds, and there was also a subcommittee there called the Trail Lakes We've been trying to get a dam or a weir put in Swan Lake because our lake drops to about, it freezes to the bottom. The deepest place is about 3 meters. And then in those meetings, I was introduced to Jason Van Robes from Ag Foods Canada in Living Labs. And we started the conversation, and then we thought about doing a drainage system. That's where it all started, and we've since built a little dam and a retention pond to get retention pond to filter the leaching from maybe from the pesticides or herbicides or what comes down the underground streams that go through our lakes, because there's 2 aquifers under our lands, and we're trying to control the quality of the water and protect our waters. And that's how I got on with Jason, with the help of Jason Van Robes, that we're doing that study at the moment. We've had a few problems I'd say within the last 1.5 to 2 years. We had built a dam back in about 25 years ago. We had a potato farm. We were taking our potatoes to Carnation Foods, but that closed down. So we had built a dam to retain water for our irrigation. And then we also had a gully erosion from our underground streams. So me and Jason worked on it, and then we got involved in Greenfield from Pembroke Valley Conservation District and some engineers on how we can work with this the situation that we're having with the erosion. And then also I'm interested in some of the we did the environmental side assessments since 1, 2, and 3, and we never done anything to rectify some of those situations. And then I find Living Labs would be able to help in some of those cases where it pertains to land or water. Maybe the pasturing bison we have here, bison, the pasturing. And we're also doing the zoning and that kind of stuff. But since Jason has been on in the Valley with Cliff Greenfield, we've been able to accomplish some of these tasks that we would normally not have been able to do without the help of Living Lab, which is a collaborative research we're doing with Jason. A lot easier as we would have to hire an engineer or a specialist to come in and do some of this work that we didn't know that what was happening until we got involved with Living Labs in the conservation district. Under our land code, we are able to manage our lands, but there's still a lot of our community to get expertise in order to rectify some of these situations that are arising, like the water sampling, soil sampling, things that we never had before. You know, it's all these specialists that are involved with in Ag Canada. It sure helps to have people on board that know this answer. Well, I'm not going to all the answers, but to help us on some of these matters that are affecting our community. Some of these things we weren't aware of until Living Labs came out and kind of viewed our property and also coming out with the trail cams because we had a cougar problem here for a while, and we're looking after, we're looking for the wild boars and that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff we never thought of till later, because I was also thinking about doing the habitat, some kind of habitat study, because of we have certain species at risk that are affecting our lands in Carberry, like the skink and the monarch. I think it's called the monarch butterfly, and also now the red-headed woodpecker. So some of these are the issues that are affecting us, and we can't plan in their area unless we go around them to do more planning, especially in Carberry. But with the help of all the people that are involved in areas that come up, like the retention and the little dam we had built, since of the COVID, we had been working on it for some time, but we haven't been able to tell the community members what it was. So they've been, a lot of them are questioning what is happening there and here and there. But as far as it goes, we haven't been able to have a community engagement where we can explain exactly what we are doing. So what we're doing is we're sending out, Jason made a presentation and a few people made presentations. We sent those out to each home, handed over to each home, and I don't know if some of them will understand it and some will not. But once things open up, we'll go back and explain again as to what some of these structures are and what we're doing out in the fields, because people wonder what we're doing and they don't know. So hopefully we can explain all that as soon as we can. Since I've been land manager for 17 years now, the most effective way was visually. Those open community meetings, they understand better, and a lot of them we explain it in our own language, with PowerPoints and pictures. But if we send out a newsletter, a lot of them, especially the elders, they don't really understand what it is that's being written. And so that's the most important, I think, would be open community engagements, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in the near future.
Thank you, Eric, for that great interview that you did for Living Labs, and thank you for your continued support and Swan Lake First Nation's continued support of the Living Labs project, and also your partnership with the Pembina Valley Watershed District and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Like John said, we're going to take questions at the end. We're going to have a full panel, so if you've got questions in mind, please keep them in mind, and we'll have runners like we have for every other so. Our next two presentations will be from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada researchers that are carrying out water management and biodiversity research within Swan Lake First Nation. And the first presenter will be Mr. Steve Sager. Mr. Sager is a soil resource specialist with the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Science and Technology branch in Morden, Manitoba. Steve has a bachelor's degree in agriculture from the University of Manitoba, specializing in agronomy, and has worked 30 years with Agriculture Canada, and is currently working on several projects related to irrigation, drainage, nutrient management, and agronomy. Please welcome Mr. Steve Sager.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I'll give a 10-minute presentation on some of the co-development projects that we're currently working with Swan Lake First Nation. I developed this presentation along with Henry Wilson, who is a research scientist with Ag Canada out of Brandon here. So Eric kind of mentioned it a bit or discussed it, some of the co-development, the component of developing these projects. The early stage was meeting with the Swan Lake First Nation, with the elders, the land department, chief and council, and the community. Cliff Greenfield, he played a key role with Pembina Valley Water District, as well as Jason early on with Ag Canada. And then there's a number of different research and development staff from Warden and Brandon that were involved in developing projects that address some of the concerns and issues that Swan Lake First Nation had. Some of the summary of that early discussion is the importance of Swan Lake itself and the water quality, concerns with eutrophication and water quality issues, upstream flooding related to roads and infrastructure and ponding out in fields, wildlife habitat and habitat and culturally important plants for a priority, as well as pesticides and use and pesticides leaving the fields and getting into the water, concerns with that, with fisheries and culturally important plants, and then also concerns with soil erosion and sediments entering the waterway and lake itself, and then as well as pasture management on a lot of their land base was kind of some of the key priorities that came out. So from this process, with all the interested with Swan Lake First Nation, Cliff's group with Pembina Valley, and then Ag Canada, we developed a couple key projects. The one that I want to focus mainly on is a site that we call SLS 49. So some of the objectives of this site is to improve water quality, reduce downstream flooding, enhance wildlife habitat and culturally value of the area, as well as increase cropland productivity in some of the wet areas on this piece of land. So this project has several components to it. One of the main components is a water retention dam that was constructed in the fall of 2019. It's just under 7 acre-feet, drains 70 acres of cropland that drains into it. And the dam itself was built in an area prone to excess moisture, poor cropping, so it didn't take a lot of land out of productive land out of production. Some of the key monitoring is to monitor water flow and nutrients coming off the field, as well as the benefit or potential of the dam itself in retaining nutrients and sediment and water to reduce downstream flooding. Second component that was developed on this site is tile drainage of 13 acres in an area that was chronically poor yielding area. So some of the value to the First Nation as well as a renter is to improve yields, allow for timely field operations, and one of the concern is just with the tile effluent can be a source of nitrates. So part of the objective and site goals for this is to get a better understanding of the quantity and quality and water chemistry coming off the field, both tile water as well as surface water, to get better understanding under Manitoba conditions, the quantity and quality of both surface and tile flow. So we have a few of these in some of the other watersheds as well. Currently the tile, it goes from that yellow area and drains directly west, bypasses the pond into the creek, but currently we're recycling all the tile into the pond. The next component of this project is a wetland terrace. So the water water flows. It's an area that's a flat area similar to a rice paddy. So it's bermed up, and it's about a 1 acre area that kind of pre-treats the water before it enters a pond. So all the water is coming from the east that drains into the wetland terrace, and any excess water drains directly into the pond. So this area is ceded to wetland species, and it allows an opportunity to utilize some of the sediments, nutrients, and water so treated before it enters the pond. This area provides opportunity to cut it for hay and remove those nutrients and vegetation, and phosphorus would be of particular concern. So there's a number of different BMPs that are going on at this site. Third one that's being planned, and Cliff and myself have met with the tile drainage contractor, is a saturated buffer. And basically it's installing a tile along a riparian area, and the tile distributes the water that's coming off the field along that riparian area, and the living roots and plants within that riparian area can utilize both the water and nutrients and reduce direct flow into the creek. Here's a preliminary plan that hopefully will be functional next year, where the red line is the new tile that's being installed along the creek, and hopefully the trees and grass will soak up that certain amount of tile water, and the stream bank vegetation will be enhanced with water-loving trees such as willows. So this is an opportunity to test this type of end-of-pipe treatment for tile drainage under Manitoba conditions. This practice, or BMP, is being used in a lot of the mid-central states such as Nebraska and Iowa. So I think this site provides a real good opportunity to try it out or assess it under Manitoba conditions. One of the last components, and Melanie will probably touch base on this, is with all the earthwork and construction that's gone on in this area, there's a lot of opportunity to enhance, the dam and the backside of the dam and some of these areas with biodiversity and pollinator species. It also provides pond stabilization and a wetland terrace I mentioned. There's a wet mix that was seeded. So a quick summary, this site provides a real opportunity for multiple researchers and development staff to assess BMPs. We have a water retention component, tile drainage and recycling, wetland terrace, saturated buffer to treat the tile effluent, which will hopefully be functional next year, and then also some of the biodiversity and habitat plantings are integrated in it as well. And we have some people involved to also look at the socio and economic aspects on the costs and some of the adoption type of approaches that take to assess these BMPs. I just want to move into another component of some of the Living Labs work related to Swan Lake, and we're doing this on a number of watershed, and Henry's more of a main lead on it, but Swan Lake watershed, we have 12 monitoring sites that we're monitoring in-stream flow and nutrients throughout the year. And you can see there's 4 or 5 sub-watersheds within the Swan Lake Basin that that we do have monitoring sites located. And Henry put a couple slides together. Just it was a dry year, but we did get some runoff probably 3 or 4 weeks earlier, snow melt than normal, and just some of the nutrient reductions before a wetland and after the wetland, looking at total phosphorus, total dissolved phosphorus and nitrates. So, you know, there are definitely benefits of the wetlands reducing the nutrients during, at least during this 2021 spring melt. And this is part of the project that we're going to hopefully continue for a number of years. Oh. Here's just another slide looking at a few different scenarios of some of those subbasins. The one site on the left is predominantly a groundwater fed part of the section of the stream. So a lot of the total phosphorus is quite a bit lower compared to some of a location with a mixed cropland and Swan Lake First Nation wetland, and then comparing it to the cropland dominated without wetland. So that's kind of a summary of the activities that we have going on. There's a number of other ones that we're working closely with Eric and Swan Lake First Nation, as well as Cliff, that we want to, or will be continue on for the next couple of years.
Thank you, Steve, for that great presentation. So our final presentation this morning will be from Ms. Melanie Dubois. Ms. Dubois is the Senior Riparian and Biodiversity Biologist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the Living Lab Eastern Prairies co-lead. Melanie has been working on the interactions between agriculture and wildlife since 1992. Her work started with gophers, headed over to stream bank assessments for a while, and now focuses mainly on wild bees, livestock predation, and biodiversity habitat that benefits ag production. Please welcome Ms. Melanie Dubois.
Hello. It's been a while since I did this in real life. Podium's a little in the way. Usually it's a cat's butt that's in the way. We'll go from here. So my name is on the slide, but I have an entire team of people behind me that assist with the biodiversity component of this. Actually, one of whom is in the room, May Elsinger up at the top. I'm sure most people know her. Her work on rangelands and forage, and all things to do with plants. Oh, I'm out of practice. There we go. So I am focusing on the biodiversity component right now. And we're looking to fill a lot of gaps with this. So we're doing a lot of specific things with Swan and in our other living labs, but it also has sort of a broader function. We're going to have living labs in each of the provinces. Manitoba and PEI were the first ones to go live, and so we're a bit of a pilot. We also have a little bit more capacity here in Manitoba to do the biodiversity monitoring, because one of the things we lack is basic baseline maps of pollinators across Canada. So we're trying to fill that, and there's real opportunity with the living labs to address some of our questions around the impact of BMTs on pollinators, both positive and negative. And we also want to be able to try and answer some of those questions that we get asked as agriculture. Like, so what are the impacts of agriculture on pollinators? Well, we know they're declining, but we really don't have good, firm data for that. I mean, there are pockets of data, but we're really trying to fill that. Trying to look at those thresholds of disturbances, how much habitat is enough, you know, how much habitat we need to support our ag systems. We also have a lot of questions around seed mixes. when you're talking about biodiversity plantings or plantings to support pollinators or beneficial insects, that's a big part of May's work, is coming up with those mixes. How do you establish them successfully, and what are the equipment that you need to do that? And we're also looking at risk reduction from predators. Coyotes are a big issue with livestock producers, and we want to come up with some risk mitigation for those. And invasive swine, they're growing all the time. Saskatchewan is further ahead than us in terms of looking at that, but we really need to catch up here. So what was interesting is that biodiversity did come out as one of the 4 main priorities within Living Lab, and we have about 80% of our Living Labs producers involved in that. So I've touched on a few of these things, and Steve gave you a bit of an intro by looking at SL49, that pollinator habitat assessment and planting is something that we're really focusing on, because there are a lot of things that go on in agriculture where you have to replace vegetation or add vegetation, or perhaps you have areas where you want to swap out vegetation. So we want to know what kind of impact that's going to have on your pollinators, and we want to be able to give really good practical suggestions for installing that habitat so it's successful and that it continues throughout the years to do the things you need it to do. So we're also touching on riparian health assessments. There was really good talk yesterday on riparian areas, so we know that there are a lot of questions around that. And again, livestock predation, risk mitigation, and then that overall biodiversity monitoring. So I'm really going to focus on the monitoring. On that, I will flash up the map here. This is Swan Lake, and these show some of the areas that we were focusing on for our monitoring. So we're looking at breeding birds. This particular component is led by Patsy Michaels, and we're trying to see whether or not we can use automatic recording units to do this work. Doing monitoring of breeding birds is expensive work to do. It's highly specialized and pretty labor intensive. So we're trying to see if we can deploy these ARUs to be our ears out there when we can't actually have staff. It's really specialized, so we're working with Environment Canada and Climate Change, or ECCC, to do those with us. We have a lot of partners in Living Labs. So whenever I say we, I really mean that there is a massive number of people that are working on this, both in the conservation districts, watershed districts, I call them watershed districts, but then there's Fed Family, there are NGOs like NCC, and all kinds of folks backing us up and contributing to this. So you'll see pockets in there where I mention other people. So we're also looking at beneficial insects. So we're looking at native bees specifically. When we're trying to pick what taxa to monitor, that's actually a really complicated question, because we want to try and pick umbrella species. We kind of want to do keystone species. We want to do species that maybe are struggling, that are going to tell us a little bit about what's going on in the ag landscape. So for the purposes of our project, we are going to start looking at aerial insect biomass coming up, but for now we're going to stick with native bees and carabids, which are ground nesting or ground beetles that eat other pests and also seeds. So the other thing we're doing is a large number of habitat assessments, trying to take a look at what is it that you already have, what can we amp up, either through planting or management, things like that. So it looks at landscape, it looks at food forage, nesting habitat, and farm management practices, where we sort of take a look at maybe some of the pesticides that you're using as well within that. Steve mentioned a bit about the bison pasture project. We're really just getting started on this. May put out a number of grazing cages in the past season to get an idea of what the carrying capacity was, and start looking at, okay, well, what can we do with these pastures? I think there's some plans to do a little bit of water work with small dams, etc. But we're really looking at, can we use bison as an ecosystem engineer to improve the health of the pastures and also the biodiversity associated with it. Riparian health assessments. This used to be a big part of my job, a little bit less. I've been more on the native bees. But one of the things we're trying to do is use geomatics and modeling to look for indicators of riparian health. It's really challenging to look at the quality of your riparian health with just boots on the ground. So we're trying to gain back some capacity to do this remotely. Livestock predation risk assessment. If anyone is having problems with coyotes or wolves, please come see me. We have a few different pilots running. We have a provincial pilot with the Manitoba beef producers. So what we're trying to do is just take a look at factors that predispose your operation to predation and put in place some mitigation for that. And again, invasive swine. I know people call them wild hogs. I think now we're trying to switch to invasive swine to make them sound even nastier than they are. So we've got some cameras out there deployed. Ryan Brook from Saskatchewan has been doing a lot of this work. So we're just trying to see what we can see within our own within these watersheds and see what else. You know, they were mentioning we've got some issues with some cougar sightings within Swan, so we want to see what's out there. And yeah, so they all kind of fit together to give us a broad overview of what are the impacts of agriculture on biodiversity and what are the improvements made by some of the BMPs that we're installing within the land. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you to all the presenters today. That was great, very informative, and we look forward to your questions. Before we get to the Q&A panel, I just wanted to say from Manitoba Association of Watersheds how grateful we are to be the partner in this project that goes until March of 2023, and we look forward to being part of the next iteration of Living Labs. That's through the Agriculture and Climate Solutions Program, which will be starting hopefully that process next year. But I also want to acknowledge, today we focused on the Pembina Valley Watershed District and Swan Lake First Nation. I want to acknowledge that the Assiniboine West Watershed District, the Red Boyne Watershed District, and the St. Rousseau Watershed District, who are all involved in the Living Labs Eastern Prairies project. You are tremendous partners, and your dedication to this project has brought in great results and will in the future. So thank you very much. So at this time, we'd like to open up for discussion. And like the other panels, we have students here that will have the microphone. So if you're interested in asking a question of any of the panelists, we have Cliff Greenfield from the Pembina Valley Watershed District. He did his presentation yesterday, so I didn't ask him to do another one today. But he's here to answer questions on behalf of the district. So feel free to put your hand up and ask a question.
Well, you guys heard from me, Hank Venema from Strategic Systems Engineering. Really impressive. I hadn't seen the Swan River First Nation work. Very, very impressive. I guess my question is next phase of Living Lab and horizontal diffusion. And, you know, there's U.S. Department of Agriculture encodes some of these BMPs as design standards, and they've got, you know, design manuals, and companies like us can pick up these design standards and diffuse them horizontally. I'm just curious if, you know, the modalities for encoding these BMPs as design standards and engaging private sector, for example, in diffusing them horizontally will be part of the next phase of Living Labs. Because, you know, it's great to do this stuff, and then how are you going to get it out to hundreds of thousands of producers across the country is the question.
Okay, I'll take a shot at that one. So I would say, I guess stay tuned would be the first one. The next version, I guess, of Living Labs is going to be starting up in a little over a year, I guess. And not completely aware of all the aspects of it, but it's going to follow a similar format as this one. But there is always the distribution of information that we look to do. I guess, unless someone else like Molly can answer this a little bit better than I do, I don't really have an answer for you right now because I don't know how that program is going to turn out, and how it's going to be laid out in the next little while. And so I don't want to make a false commitment or anything like that. So
can you bring it back to Ottawa, this comment, though?
Yes, we
Sean?
can certainly bring,
Yeah.
bring that comment back to Ottawa. Yeah.
Okay, okay, well, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Gary.
Or grab, there's a, you only have one?
Hi, my name is Joe Gardner. I'm a farmer and a soil lover. I'm kind of wondering about the project. So I got a few questions, and whoever wants to tackle them, have at it. I'm wondering about the goal of the tile drain project. How many acres were affected? The cost, and realistically, is that a realistic cure for our watersheds? Does it scale?
With regard to the tile drainage, the work was done in consultation with Eric and the land management department, as well as looking at the field. This part of the project was mainly looking at that one area just because it was a closed system of 13 acres, and we could monitor both the surface and tile leaving that area. It was a targeted type of tile drainage where not the whole field was tiled, so that was part of the thought process on where we tiled and why. And some of the objectives of and part of this project is to get a better understanding on its efficiency or effectiveness for crops, as well as what the surface and tile component is partitioning, and to also assist on providing information for other farmers in similar situation on planning and designing their tile drainage system, and also looking at the surface water component as well. It was more of a kind of targeted approach, and also to get a better understanding of the tile surface partitioning under Manitoba. There's not a lot of data and research related to that.
Not seeing any other hands yet. I have a quick question for Stephen. The same question for Melanie as well. How did the drought season that we had in 2021 affect your research activities when it comes to water management as well as biodiversity? Go ahead.
Well, with the water side of it, we definitely had limited samples collected during the year, particularly on the tile. The surface water and the in-stream probably was definitely 3 or 4 weeks earlier than normal, but we were able to get some surface flow during the spring and snow or snow melt runoff. And the drought definitely affected some of the yields within the fields, as well as, but the drought, in some ways, we were still partly setting up our trials, so the drought allowed us to get our sites better equipped for monitoring in the fall and going into next year. And I guess with discussion with probably throughout all the watersheds, the drought has definitely increased the discussion or interest in water retention components, looking at areas where farmers can store water on their land.
Thanks, Steve. Mel?
Could speak to this more directly, but I know it was certainly a challenge when you're trying to do any type of habitat planting. I mean, really planting anything, trying to get a good catch on that was very challenging. We have an opportunity hopefully next year to do some overseeding and put in some live planting material. So that was a real struggle in the biomass trials. Obviously the grasslands and pasture systems were really not as productive as they were. And last year with COVID, we weren't able to do our full field season. So it's going to be challenging that we won't have as many years of data to compare to. So hopefully, knock on wood, we get better moisture this next year.
Thanks, Mom. Question up there?
I just had a question. I may be a little bit confused that I just had a question about the tile drainage. So are you suggesting that the tile drainage itself is a BMP? Or are you suggesting that the nutrient uptake from the plants and the vegetation downstream is the BMP? I'm just a little bit confused that drainage would be a better management practice for management of water in a watershed.
Yeah, no, the tile drainage isn't considered the BMP. The overall project there is all the taking into account the First Nation and looking at that parcel of land. So they did have that poor producing area that they were looking to tile. So some of the work was in the planning side with looking at targeted drainage, only the wet area. And then the BMP is the end of pipe treatment, the saturated buffer. At one time, originally, we were planning to maybe have a wood chip bioreactor. Some of these end of pipe treatments for Manitoba conditions, there's not a lot of research. So with Swan Lake First Nation's interest in the water management in the lake, we thought it was a great opportunity to assess those BMPs. And the other part of it with the retention dam is allows us the capability of diverting the tile into the retention pond rather than it leaving the property.
Any other questions? Feel free to put your hand up.
Thanks. So how big was the wetland terrace, and is there a sort of ratio between the size of the area that was tiled to the size of the terrace, or is it done by the amount of water you're expecting to come out of?
Yeah, the wetland terrace is just approximately an acre, and the size was, a lot of it was based on the area that was chronically wet, so we're kind of limited in the sheer size of the area. So we did take into account the drainage area, but we thought it's an opportunity to use this unproductive area, enhance it with vegetation, and provide another treatment option of the surface water before it enters the pond. And it's constructed flat so that that hay and forage can be harvested periodically for food production.
Any other questions? Nope, there's one over here.
Steps in
You got a runner.
Hi, I'm Leila with IISD, but my question is more just out of my own curiosity. I'm very interested about the biomonitoring program. I think my question is more for Melanie, I guess. For the birds, have you identified any key species in the area, and how is that kind of get the directions from? Is it more for legal requirements? I noticed earlier in the beginning, I think maybe Eric mentioned there is a red-headed woodpecker in the area, which is protected under SARA, but just wondering if that also take into account any indigenous, is it indigenous knowledge-based kind of species identification?
Well, so far, we're just at the identification stage, because what the ARUs do is they do sound recordings, and then we have to get them transcribed, and then that will give us basically presence and absence, and then we'll start to do more in-depth bird surveys to take a look. So right now, we do have a bit of an idea of what's out there. The Conservation Data Center is a great repository for species at risk information. We are working closely with Swan and folks there that have knowledge of the species in the area, trying to incorporate the ones that are of concern to them and of cultural importance. So we're going to try and blend those lists as we go. We don't have a list yet from our ARUs, but yeah, we're certainly working on them. You know, SARA is only enforced on federal land, which this, of course, is not federal land, but we do keep in contact with our provincial counterparts that have the Endangered Species Act and sort of blend all those things together when we're taking a look at what management is going on and some of the impacts of the land use in the area.
Cool, thank you. I have a follow-up question on that. For the birds' reproductive activities, is the automatic ARU, is that a generally used practice for monitoring behaviors?
Yeah, they're becoming more and more popular. Environment Canada uses them, like hundreds and hundreds of them. We felt all special because we have like 2 per watershed, because they're kind of expensive and they're a little bit newer, at least new to us. And the skill involved in doing the transcription is still pretty highly specialized, like a highly specialized skill set, because you still have to know your bird. So like the advantage of those is you don't have to have a person out there at sunrise doing those. But they are becoming more and more popular because you can deploy, you know, tons of them depending on your budget. So ECCC is using them a lot now to do their bird surveys.
Thank you. Last question. For the habitat assessment, I noticed you listed a couple focus on there. Is wetland part of the focus as well? And if so, is there a program going on for wetland mapping, and what system do you use for wetland classification?
Well, right now, I guess the wetlands would be treated separately. They'd be within the riparian assessment, not as much the pollinator assessment. You know, but the pollinator assessment itself looks at the entire area around our sampling sites. So it looks at the land use breakdowns, and then we go and we do vegetation surveys within each of the polygons in the more natural areas. The system that we use for the riparian assessments are the Alberta Cows and Fish, and average one that we do for boots on the ground. And for the pollinator habitat assessment, we're modeling off of the Xerxes method. We've done some tweaks on it because we've incorporated research from Diana Bezecki-Robson here in Manitoba, who's done a lot of work on food webs and things like that, and looking at important pollinator plants. So we're kind of doing a blended thing on that. For the remote sensing component of the riparian health assessments, we did a pilot, I guess it was 10 years ago, easily internally and also with NHHC, where we were looking at doing large-scale riparian health assessments using eCognition as the software program to do the modeling. We built the model, it was quite successful. I don't know if I should be criticizing federal government in public, but then we had draft and everyone got fired in our geomatics department. So we're just trying to regain that capacity there. So I guess in terms of what system we're using, yeah, it's kind of a blend, and we're working on that, program.
So I know we're coming up on the lunch hour, and a few people have started to go get in line, which is great. We have a shorter lunch hour than today. We have one more question. Jake, we do have time for one more question.
Thanks. Dan. I understand that this was a dry year and it obviously limited our studies and modeling and statistics. Has any work been done this year on biomass harvesting? Anybody aware of any?
Are you talking about grassland biomass, or were you making reference to, say, like willow harvesting for biomass for nutrient reduction that way?
Any of it, bulrushes, whatever you're involved in. Is anybody involved in any biomass harvesting this fall because it's such a dry year?
Yeah, we weren't doing that within the Living Labs. It doesn't mean that our partners weren't doing. You know, if our partners were.
What? Yeah. I think the answer is no. At least within the context of the Living Labs project, yeah. We do have time for one more if anybody wants to ask a question. I think John and Melanie wanted to make one comment before we go.
So, just a quick comment since it was brought up. ACS, Agricultural Climate Solutions. That's going to be there's a part of that is going to be the new edition of Living Labs. There's 6 provinces in Canada that don't presently have a Living Labs, and they're being rolled out first. Their call of proposals was this year, and if everything works out, they should be starting to work in April 2022 for Manitoba, because we have an existing project already, Living Labs, and it continues until the end of fiscal for 2022, so the March 2023. That project, we're going to be delayed by a year, but you should expect to start hearing information about it in the new fiscal, so April of 2022. You should be hearing some stuff about a new call for proposals there.
To look at that. One thing I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, if you want to get involved in biodiversity monitoring, one of the ACC students in cooperation with Living Lab is doing a study looking at badgers. We've all seen them, but we want to know more about where they are, so swing by their booth. We've got these handy little magnets that Cliff helped us get together. Thank you, Cliff. It's good for all of Manitoba, so if you want to put in a sighting, and that's great. And I want to thank our other watersheds. Like we were saying, we focused on Swan today, but it wouldn't be possible without the partnership of all of our partners in that.
All right, everyone, it's a shorter lunch break today, so we'll let you get off to lunch. Thank you for all your questions. They were great. Thank you to all the panelists and your research perspectives and your insight. Thank you. And the next sessions will start at 1:30 sharp.